You're listening to the Longer Haul Youth Ministry Podcast with Jody Livingston, episode number 39. One ring to rule them all. Or, well, one place to store it all.
Welcome to the Longer Haul Youth Ministry Podcast, helping you survive and thrive in youth ministry. And now your host, Jody Livingston.
Well, hey, everybody. Welcome to the show today. Thanks for tuning in and listening and making this podcast today a part of your day. If it's your first time checking out the show, welcome. Thanks for coming on over and checking it out. And if you're coming on back, well, thanks for coming on back. You can catch me on the Twitter sphere at Jody Livingston. That's Jody. And of course, over on the Facebook at The Longer Haul. All of the links and resources mentioned, and there's some pretty sweet ones that will be mentioned in this episode. You can find over at the show notes page at thelongerhaul.com/episode 039. That's thelongerhaul.com/039. If you enjoy the show, man, be sure to subscribe so you catch it every time an episode comes out. And if you got a few seconds, few minutes, head over to iTunes and Stitcher, Google Play, wherever you are finding this, and write and leave a review there for the podcast. I'd appreciate it very, very much. Super encouraging for me and really, really helpful for other youth pastors and youth workers. It helps them find the show along the way. So if you're finding some value in it and finding it helpful, I'd really appreciate you taking the time to do just that. I am so excited for today's episode. It's been a few weeks since I've had an episode coming out, and this one has been waiting for a bit to be released. And really, the only reason it hasn't is just because, well, it's May in student ministry, and I don't know about you, but for me, this is where everything starts getting crazy. And if you're tired, you're sitting here listening to this and it's May and you're tired as a youth pastor, youth worker, just remember it's May and you're supposed to be tired and summer's coming. So we've been running like crazy here, trying to get everything wrapped up as the school year comes to an end, and then geared up as summer is just around the corner. And so that's left me a little bit busy. And as much as I love you and pulling for you, rooting for you, and am dedicated to the podcast and to the blog, my primary responsibility and focus will always be my own ministry. And so hopefully you understand that and respect that. I'm committed to this fully and do want to help and continue to produce helpful content and give you some tools and practical steps and things that you need. But I will not do that at the expense of my own ministry. And unfortunately, there are going to be seasons where my ministry is just going to need more of my focus and time. And that's kind of been where I have been, and then had sick family and a whole bunch of other stuff with that as well. So I'm excited to be back and have another episode for you. I am really excited about this episode. If you've been around the podcast or the blog or on the mailing list for more than a day or two, you probably know how much of a fan I am of Evernote and how much I use it. It is easily my top resource, my go-to resource. If of all the things that I recommend and the top resources that I recommend or that I use, Evernote is by far the one I use the most. And so I find it so very helpful in so many ways. It really does keep me on track and kind of hold me together, not just ministry-wise, but my life for that matter. And so today I have for you the guru of all things Evernote, Mr. Brett Kelly himself. And I am so excited for you to hear this interview and to just to learn some from Brett. I think Evernote is a phenomenal resource. If you're not using it, I really believe you should be for a number of reasons and different ways that we get into in the interview. You're going to hear him. We're going to talk about what Evernote is and what it does, what you can do with it. We're going to give you some really practical kind of steps and things along the way. I'll share some ways that I use it. Brett shares some ways that he uses it. We also give you a few little bonus cool tricks and tips in here, and then even some more advanced tips along the way. But a super, super good interview. I'm a little giddy to have him on the show, actually, and I'm sure you're going to get a ton of value out of it. So that's probably enough of me chit-chatting here off the front end. I'll be quiet. We'll jump right in here to today's interview with Mr. Brett Kelly, creator of Evernote Essentials. Well, hey, Brett, thanks for coming on the show, man. I really appreciate you taking the time to do this pretty early where you are out on the West Coast. And so I know you're a busy guy, lots of things going on. So thanks for coming on today.
Oh, it's my pleasure, Jody. Thanks for having me.
I'm really excited because folks who've listened for a while or who've been reading the blog will know that I am a big fan of Evernote. I use it a ton for sure. I think if Evernote decided tomorrow that they cease to exist, I would cease to exist. I have my whole life is in Evernote, and that's a little scary. That's a little scary to think. But man, I am.
We should talk about that. That's an interesting kind of. I don't know if you want to.
Yeah.
The idea of, because I mean, I'm obviously a pretty heavy Evernote user also, and if it went away, that would definitely like suck, and I would be in a rough spot.
Yeah.
But kind of like, what's the backup plan? Because that's a question I get sometimes. And I don't know. I don't want to hijack whatever.
No, dude.
About, but
I'm not gonna lie. I have thought about that. Like, okay, if this all went away, what would I do? Because I mean, I have everything in there. Everything in there for sure. And so I was kind of an early adopter. We spoke just briefly about this. I jumped on Evernote pretty early, and I used it for about 2 weeks and then quit because I couldn't figure it out, and it just said, it's not working.
Yeah.
And then a little while after that, Evernote Essentials came out, and I heard about it through, I think, Michael Hyatt. Grabbed it and decided to give it another try. After really that, and then a conversation with a friend who was using it a lot. And that, man, that's made all the difference. And literally, it keeps my life together. There's about 4 or 5, kind of tools or apps I really use consistently, and that one is easily in the top 1 or 2. Nice. Everything goes in there. So Evernote Essentials has been a huge helpful tool for me and resource in just kind of learning Evernote and figuring out how to use it, because it's pretty overwhelming and intimidating at first.
I agree. I think that's partly was the impetus for writing it. Is it's simple in some ways, but when you look at it, everyone's like, oh man, this app is so great, blah blah blah, and you install it and you're kind of like, okay, you're looking at it and you're seeing like kind of a blank page, kind of like almost a word processor document, and you're like, well, so I can put anything in here? Okay, well, like what? And the sort of analysis paralysis can take over a little when you try to figure out or try to bridge the gap between your best buddy over there who's like, this app is better than sliced bread. And you're sitting there going, am I an idiot? Because like I'm looking at it and it's not looking all that cool or all that intuitive.
Yeah, it's like, now what? I have it. Now
exactly.
What? Okay, so let's talk for just a minute. Can you maybe explain for listeners who may not know what Evernote is?
Sure. So the best way I've been able to kind of distill it is, so Evernote is a electronic digital notebook, right? It's a notebook I'm going to fumble through this because I haven't gone through this spiel in a while. But if you have I keep a paper notebook in my pocket all the time for writing things down, making a little list and stuff like that. It's really useful for me. So I imagine like I've got this little 48-page book. I'm going to pull it out and make my chair squeak real quick. And so I open this thing up and it's got like my daughter's school friend's phone number is the first page I turn to, and here's something I talked about with my shrink, whatever. So I can open this notebook up and at the top of the first page go, show me that phone number. And it will like flip to the right page and show me the phone number. Or I can put pictures of my kids, from years ago, or notes from a meeting that I'm going to have, or, kind of a post-mortem on this conversation you and I are having right now, and kind of talk about what we discussed, blah, blah. So it's just basically this notebook where you can put pretty much anything. And almost everything is searchable with a few exceptions. The only thing you can't put in there is really big stuff like video. But beyond that, it'll hold whatever you've got. And it will just sort of archive it permanently. And so you can subdivide the app into different what are called notebooks. So each piece of data you add to Evernote lives in what's called a note. So a note can hold, like I said, text, pictures, files, whatever you want. And a note must live in a notebook of some kind. And I've got probably, let me tab over here and look real quick. I've got probably like 100 notebooks for various things. and from like this trip that I took several years ago that has all like the confirmation from the hotel, pictures that I took while I was there, my flight, my boarding pass when we flew, like just random kind of inanity of travel. Also, some really cool. It helps tie memories together with one of my favorite use cases for it. But I have notebooks for the newest Evernote Essentials that I just launched, and all the versions before it. So if you have a place where you want to put stuff and search for it pretty easily and have it accessible all the time, like Evernote's kind of your huckleberry, I think.
Yeah, and I think youth pastors, we tend to get kind of a rap for being really disorganized and losing a lot of things, and we've earned that, to be honest, in a lot of cases. So for me, Evernote really helps with that. I am notorious for losing receipts, and so for me to be able to scan that, take a picture of that there when I make that purchase or when I'm doing that, or if we're planning an event or we're taking a group of students somewhere, I have that all in my email, but that has a tendency to get buried beneath others and a little difficult to find. So I can stick that in Evernote as well. And, I have a notebook for receipts, and all those go in there, and I tag all those with different responsibilities in different areas of ministry that I deal with. And then different, I've got one that's kind of a notebook for retreats. And then within that, I have each different retreat, kind of an archive of that. And so for me, it really helps in that sense because in youth ministry, we tend to do a lot of things repetitively. So for example, every year we're going to go to camp. Every year we're probably going to do a mission trip somewhere. Every year we're going to do a retreat. These certain weekends or these certain things, we tend to do those year after year after year. So for me, Evernote has been a great place to be able to store those things from this year's stuff, so that next year, when that event's coming up and we're starting to plan that again, I can easily look back and search and say, okay, here's what we did last year. Here's some notes I made of things I wanted to do differently, the coming year.
Yeah.
It's been, oh man, it's so good in that sense.
Well, I think there's so much value in there's actually a chapter in the book on this, like keeping a personal history. And because I use Evernote for so many different things, I can look back on, a given point in my life, 4 years ago. If I just, open the list of all notes and click to whatever, April 26th, 2014 or 2012, I can see like what articles I was reading on the web, like what I shopped for that day, and look at the surrounding days, just kind of get a snapshot of what life looked like, which I think is really cool. And I think if we're talking about your retreat example, yeah, the idea of adding not only just sort of, bits and bobs, like here's what we did, but if you take the time to go back and add, we tried this thing, it didn't really work, or this worked really well, we should try to do this again or do it more or whatever. And kind of, so you're constantly learning from your own experiences earlier on. And if it's an annual thing, that's the kind of thing that, the details can become fuzzy after a little while. So maybe the following year, you're not super clear on how things went, but if you have that stuff written down, I think it could be, like you said, a great resource for doing it next time. Yeah,
it's been huge. A lot of my blog posts are written in Evernote. Get a ton of stuff for the podcast in there.
Yeah, totally.
A lot of notes. So all that's good. So, okay, Evernote is this amazing kind of journal, if you will, that's all searchable, keeps our life in order. How did you come about writing and putting together Evernote Essentials?
So the year was 2010. Imagine like the TV, like dream sequence.
I need James Earl Jones kind of voice in the background.
In a world. Yeah. So it was, January 2010. I was working as a web developer at this company that I no longer work for. And I got wind of Evernote in 2008. My buddy Glenn, he got me a private beta invite from when they were first relaunching the service, because Evernote has existed for like 20 years in some form, but the current incarnation showed up in 2008. So I got a beta invite and I started using it, and I started realizing, because this was like in the early days of like the iPhone, right. And I had a PC, I had to use a PC at work, which made me sad, and I had a Mac at home. And I realized, like, wait a minute, I can sync all of my stuff between my Mac and my Mac at home and my work computer. So if I, want to make a sandwich or whatever, and I find some cool recipe, I can dump it in Evernote and then get at it when I get home. That's pretty great. And so just sort of investigating that and getting really good at it, and started proselytizing it all over my office and converting people into like using this cool service. So January 2010, I was kind of, my now ex-wife and I were kind of in some debt, and not like overwhelming debt, but debt that we were having a hard time getting rid of, like some old credit cards and stuff that we were paying, but it was just we weren't making enough money to kind of get out from under it in a way that made me happy.
Right.
So I had a bunch of friends. Chris Gillibo is the most notable example. You guys probably heard of him, the $100 startup guy.
Yeah. Yep.
Good buddy of mine. I've seen him and some other friends like write and sell ebooks on the internet, and I was like, well, crap, I could probably do that. At least give it a try. And I realized, well, Evernote's become a pretty integral part of my work and just my life in general. And there wasn't really a manual for it. I mean, it came with some. It's funny. The original Evernote help was an Evernote notebook that the company had made and then shared publicly. So
nice.
Which, I mean, it's that interface is nice, but it's a little clunky for doing things like FAQs and knowledge base stuff. So that was the extent of it. It was some sort of screenshot by screenshot. Click here to do this. Click here. Not a lot of like philosophy or what's the general idea behind this feature, that kind of stuff. And I had been using it for long enough and heavily enough that I thought, okay, well, I can crank out. Originally it was going to be a series of blog posts, and I thought, you know what, I'm going to like make this thing into a book and I'm going to sell it. And so it took me it didn't take a long time to write, actually. It took all told time sitting at the keyboard, it was probably like 2 weeks.
Wow.
2.5. It took me 6 months to ship it, but it only took me like 2.5 weeks to write it,
right.
Which is part of why the creative process is hard. Anyway, so I, over the course of the next few months as I was writing it and editing it and getting feedback from friends, I actually emailed Evernote. I actually emailed Evernote really early on. Because I'm like, I'm going to write a book about their product. I don't want to get freaking sued for using Evernote in the name of the book, for some legal reason. So I let them know what I was doing, and I just want to make sure it was cool if I used the name. And they were like, that's a really cool idea. We are really happy you're doing this. Let us know how we can help. So in April of 2010, I was emailing Andrew Sinkoff, who at the time was the head of marketing, who became a buddy of mine. And he said, hey, the CEO, Phil Libin, wants to talk to you, like on the phone. And I was like, what?
Yeah, I'm in a lot of trouble.
Right. Like, no, it's good. Just wants to talk to you, find out about the book, and has a few things to discuss with you, whatever. So we chat for a little bit. Super cool guy. And at the end, he's like, so where do you work? Like, what do you do? I'm like, well, I'm a programmer professionally. Like I have been for, I don't know, at that point, it had been like 6 or 7 years. And he's like, well, do you want to work for Evernote? I was like, because I had I had a short list of companies that I wanted to work for that I would have like happily worked for, and Evernote was one of them. I was like, yeah, I do. And I'm like, but I can't move because I live in Southern California and Evernote is based in the Bay Area, Northern California. Right. So that's not really feasible for me to move. He's like, that's okay. You can work from home. I was like, woo.
Even better.
Yeah, that's great. So I'd never done that before. And so anyway, I took the job, started there in May, ended up shipping the book in July in time for what now ultimately became the Evernote App Center, which is like a bunch of third-party apps and hardware and stuff that work with Evernote. Yeah. It was called the Evernote Trunk, which I actually built when I worked there.
Ah, cool.
So anyway, I got hired there. I launched in July, and this is a very long story. Sorry.
No, that's all right.
After that, I launched it to my I had a very modest following at the time. I still do, frankly. But I got a handful of sales. The response was good, and then Evernote blogged about it, to their relatively massive audience, and then Michael Hyatt, who you mentioned earlier. Yep. He has also had pretty big reach, we'll say. He launched it. He signed up as an affiliate and promoted it to his audience. And those two, Evernote and Michael Hyatt, kind of got it the critical mass it needed to where it became like what I would consider like a ridiculously big success.
Yeah, so, it's huge. I mean, it seems like almost everywhere I turn, people are talking about Evernote, and almost hand in hand, Evernote Essentials seems to follow a lot because it's hard to explain to somebody. It's hard to explain what Evernote is without it making it sound ridiculously simple, which it is to a certain degree until people open it, like we've already said, and they're like, I don't know what to do with this.
Right.
And so it really, I mean, even as far as other apps and other programs that I use, there really aren't many very well done, clear and concise kind of guides on how to use them. It's usually almost an afterthought from most of the companies, it seems, that design them.
I think there can be, I don't know, kind of a forest for the trees. I'm not, picking on anybody here. Sure. But if you spend enough time designing, working with kind of, gently massaging this app into what do you want it to be, so many of the details have come into stark relief for you. And you can just see how the thing's supposed to work because you've thought so heavily about it. But if you drop it in someone's lap and they're just a cold, I've never seen this before, what is this? You kind of forget that they are totally uninitiated in as far as what your app does and what it's for, what it's good for. So I think part of the reason why, my book and other books like it have done well is because they help bridge that gap. And so you can hand Evernote to somebody and okay, read this book. It'll take you a couple hours. And then you'll have a much clearer idea, at least conceptually, how this thing can be super useful instead of just being kind of, how do I, what's so great?
Right. Okay, so we talked about a few kind of ways that I use it and some other kind of things that you've done and how you're using Evernote. But what are some, I know you talk about this a lot actually in Evernote Essentials, but what are some other practical ways, just even on a day-to-day basis, that you can use Evernote that maybe people wouldn't think about?
Okay. Well, let me not to just trot out the old yarns. Okay, so project planning. That's probably my biggest use case for Evernote in the macro sense. I'd use it every day for small, one-off things.
Yeah.
But so I'm going to look at the Evernote Essentials. I called it version 5. It's not version 5, the newest one I just launched. Looking at, there's 49 notes in this notebook. All right. And going back to the very first one, there's a topic brainstorm. There's things to fix in the previous version. There's bugs that people sent me about misspelled words, missing screenshots, stuff like that. And then going through there, it's okay, what are the, now we're going to now have another task brainstorm or topic brainstorm and just several ideas for things that I might include in the product. And then ultimately we get down to things like sales letter drafts and, business automation rules and stuff that I want to use when I actually sell it. All of it obviously falls under the umbrella of Evernote Essentials version 5 or whatever. Let's see. That's not a super fun example. Let's think of a different one.
No, but I think that's really helpful because a lot of what we do in youth ministry is project planning. It's, whether it's an event, whether it's whatever, we do a lot of that. Even for me, as I am starting, I have a notebook that's kind of like illustrations. And so because I'm teaching every week, if something happens or if I read something or I think about something that, that would be a really good illustration for, a lesson that I may be teaching down the road on this, I'll throw that in there, as I start to brainstorm about whatever the event or the project or then I throw that in there. I know something else that for me was really interesting, and you mentioned this in Evernote Essentials, and I thought, man, that is brilliant. When you talked about saving your kids' artwork, I thought really? That's every parent's worst nightmare is the artwork. You feel guilty throwing it away, but you don't know what to do with it because, I have 4 kids and they're all coming home with artwork made with whatever. And nothing can be thrown away because it's precious, right? It's
right.
And so, you talked about just scanning some of that stuff and saving that away in there. I was like, that is brilliant. You just saved my life, literally.
Well, and that's the kind of thing and that speaks to a larger, I think, problem that we have now. It's, I guess, less so than before, but just paper, just physical stuff that, you have it, you're looking at it, well, I probably should hang on to this for whatever reason, whether it's a picture your kid drew or the gas bill or whatever. But having a place where you can put that, and it works. The scanning thing kind of falls apart when you're talking about something that's covered in macaroni and glitter.
Right.
But at the same time, if it's just if it's a drawing, I get lots of drawings. My kids less so now because they're getting older. But they draw something, throw it through the scan snap, and I'm not saying just immediately shred it in front of them, thanks for the drawing, but you hang it up on your wall, on your whiteboard or wherever there's room, and you leave it up there for a little while, and it's I appreciate this thing, and I want to have it. I want to be able to show this to them when when they're going to get married or when they have their own kids, but I can't just keep a filing cabinet full of stuff they've made me as much as I would like to.
Right.
So, but any paper that I guess this is a terrible analogy. The sphere of utility gets bigger when you have a infinitely large place to put stuff. Right. So in other words, I don't feel like I have to be ruthless in throwing things away. I can just scan them, and even if it's totally inane, I've got oil change paperwork from 3 cars ago still in my Evernote account. Do I need that? No, probably not. But on the off chance I ever will, there's no there's really no downside to having it in there because this bucket is effectively infinite in its depth. So yeah, with the kid stuff, makes it really easy to kind of, and when they did it. That's the other cool thing. If my daughter walks in, she's 8 right now. She walks in and hands me this crayon drawing that she made, and I either scan it or snap a photo of it, around the day she gave it to me. Now I can look back, 10 years from now, go, man, you made that for me in April of 2016 when you were 8 years old. That's pretty cool.
Yeah,
it's not just like this kind of collection of stuff. Because I remember, I'm talking a lot. My mom has this box of photos. I think I mentioned it in the book. Like a lot of photos from my childhood are in this big box and they're just loose. There's no organization to any of it.
Yeah.
And I'll pull a picture of myself out and look, okay, I was a kid here, clearly, but really no, I could guess within a couple of years when it was taken, but that's the best I got. I can't say, that was on June 4th, 1989. And now, with all, especially when you take pictures, this isn't limited to Evernote. Like, most cameras now embed dates and stuff into the photos, and most photo managers can read those dates. But the point is, when I can attach a date and a location, especially to any piece of data I add to Evernote, which is a feature that it offers, not only do I know, not only do I have the thing, but I also have context for the thing. I know when it was taken and probably where it was taken. So I don't know. That to me adds value to information that I already have and I would have had anyway.
No, it's brilliant. One of the other things I use it for, I have a thank you file, and I think hopefully a lot of youth pastors have one of these like in their physical filing cabinet. But youth ministry, man, it's a pretty thankless job. You spend a lot of time pouring in, investing into other families, walking through some pretty crazy stuff and counseling, and you're gone a lot of evenings out. And most of the time you don't really see kind of any fruit from that or anything that comes of it until they are much older and gone. We just tend naturally as people to be very needy, and that's what we are. And so, as a youth pastor, my job is to invest in them, and I do so willingly and gladly. But the thank yous are few and far between. And I joke a lot, although not really as much joking, that once a week or so I'll quit, and then the next day I wake up and I go back to work. It can be exhausting and excruciating. So when I get those thank you notes when they do come, or that I typically, for a long time, I would stick them in my filing cabinet, in the office. The problem is it's in my office. And so if I find myself somewhere and just really discouraged, I just have to remember, in my office, I have that thank you,
There's some inspiration on the other side of town.
Somewhat, yeah. And so being able to take those and scan those or snap those and put those in Evernote, I have them always at my disposal. And man, that's really helpful for me as well. Just all kinds of that kind of stuff.
Yeah, and I think that's one of the really cool parts about Evernote is that there's really no use case too small. So, like you just said, like I don't imagine there are 500 notes in that notebook. There are probably a couple dozen.
Yeah.
Right.
Oh yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
So I've got notebooks here for two things, like with two notes in them, and because the Evernote imposes a 250 notebook account limit on anybody, so you can only have 250 notebooks. But I've got upwards of 15,000 notes, and most of them are like, kind of specific to various things. But, I've got, notebooks for, so the preschool, Montessori preschool at my church, they've hired me a handful of times to do some website stuff for them. And I've got a notebook in there for just odds and ends regarding that. And there's 6 notes in this notebook. And, it doesn't have to be, I'll use it for this one major area of my life. It's like, no, just put your grocery list in there. Who cares? Or make this, if it works, put it in there, because you can always find it if you know how to search for it. And you're not going to fill up this infinite bucket. So I don't know. I appreciate that aspect of it, where it kind of removes a lot of the ceremony around saving stuff. Yeah. You don't have to, like I said before, it doesn't have to be super important. You can just put it in there, and you can, mess around with it in there if you want to, or not, just leave it. Yeah. And unless it gets makes your search results noisy, it's fine. Just leave it there,
And it saves automatically as you go, which is nice. So you don't have to remember to hit save. And I make a lot of lists in it. I'm a checkbox kind of guy.
Oh man, me too.
The fact that you can do that right in Evernote again. I tell you what is the best, one of the best parts. I feel like I keep saying that over and over. Like, it's the best thing. I love that for me. Okay. So let me say that, let me ask and see what you think about this, and then I'll come back to this. It seems like for me, Evernote was an all or nothing deal. Like when I started using it way back when, it was probably, 2000, it was before, at least 7 years ago. So when I started using it for those first 2 weeks, I was trying just to use it for some things and not everything. And what I found was it wasn't really that helpful. But when I came back the second time after getting Evernote Essentials, I decided to put everything there. And that really made the difference for me because everything was in one place. So what that does for me now is very freeing in the sense that if I'm trying to remember where something is, I don't have to remember which file, gosh, was that in the filing cabinet at the office? Was that, did I leave that here? Was that on my work computer? Was that on my home computer? Maybe I made that note, everything is in one place. So yeah. I just know, I don't even have to think about where it is. I just know it's in Evernote and I can go and find it.
Yeah. Well, two things. I find myself doing the same thing because I don't actually do a lot of work in Evernote these days. Most of what I do now is writing, and I don't write in Evernote personally. I mean, more power to everyone who does, but I just don't prefer it. But everything surrounding the work I do lives in Evernote, if that makes sense. Like all the supporting stuff. But yeah, like there are 3 places where I look if I'm trying to find something, and Evernote and email are 2 of them.
Yeah.
And if I can't find it there's one other place, and maybe it's lost. Who knows? But the idea of having everything accessible in one spot is a very compelling reason to kind of adopt Evernote. Now, the only caveat I would offer is, and I actually talk about this in the book, is if you are somebody who is listening to, Jody and I talk about what an amazing, awesome thing Evernote is, and you decide to sort of lob wholesale your entire life into Evernote without giving a lot of thought to how it's organized, you're going to frustrate yourself pretty bad. Yeah. So I personally admonish folks who are just learning it to kind of, baby steps, like pick one thing that you're going to use, that you're going to sort of use as a trial run for Evernote. Gardening, cooking, wine, whatever your favorite thing is. Just kind of step into it a little bit, get used to how the thing functions, how tagging works, how search works, all that stuff, before you just turn your file cabinet over into Evernote. Because now that can work, and and even if you don't organize things super carefully, because frankly, I honestly don't. But I know how the search works really well, so I can always find what I'm looking for. But be careful and be intentional about it, because as much as we're talking about Evernote like it's the best things in sliced bread, and it's pretty great, but there's some learning you need to do, and you need to kind of get familiar with you need to dance with the girl before you propose to her. In other words.
Right. Don't go shred all those thank you notes because you scan them, but like hang on to that stuff. Don't abandon. I still have, there are things I have to keep hard copies of, and I do.
Sure.
And so what lives in Evernote is generally a copy of that. Okay. So what are some, that brings up a good point. What are some good practices for starting in Evernote? Like if for somebody who's listening, who's never used it, never tried it, what would you say are like some good first steps?
I would say, well, like I said, pick one thing and use it for only that, and make that the only thing you use for that topic. So gardening is just sort of a canonical example. If you garden at all, which I don't, but if you have a garden and you kind of want to keep track of where let's say you've got your 4 flower beds kind of sprinkled around your yard. Okay, well here we've got the bougainvilleas, over here we've got the red bell peppers, and over here we've got the broccoli, whatever. So if you want to keep track of how the plants grow and how you're nourishing them, then you take pictures of the flower beds. Kind of take note of what you're putting in the soil, if anything, how often you're watering, what time of day, and, just kind of use that as like a data collection bucket for this gardening project of yours. Or even just a regular old, I'm going to build a shed project or something similar, where I've got this big blank spot in my yard. I want to put a structure there that I can park my mower and my whatever else in there. And I don't currently have one. So you can use Evernote to sort of store plans you find that other people have made, or maybe you want to buy a prefab shed from Amazon, and you could put your candidate sheds in there too, and just plan, either pick one small to medium-sized area of your life or one small to medium-sized project, and use Evernote as kind of the foundation for how that thing gets managed or completed. And as you're doing that, pay attention to kind of, like I said, like how search works. That's probably, as your account gets bigger, you'll have more use for a lot of the search. But the search is really, really powerful. Arguably the most powerful thing in Evernote, if you ask me.
I agree with that.
And getting used to how that works is worth your time. Let's see.
Yeah, I think that's great. And I just want to say, for somebody who doesn't garden, I'm super impressed with the big words you just used.
Well, My lady gardens.
Okay.
And it talks about it, not a lot, but it comes up. And one of my very good friends is a certified nursery professional, has been for like 20 years, and homeboy knows plants. It's crazy just to hear him like talk and walk up to some plant, and go, "Oh, this has this four-word Latin name for like this disease this plant has," stuff like that. I'm like, whatever, you're from another planet. So I hear a lot of plant words, and I can store them long enough to puke them out on a podcast.
Yeah,
and I sound way smarter. That's a hack. You can have that one for free.
Yeah. Okay. We're all impressed, man. You're gonna get emails about garden. Like, I've got this plant in my garden. I can't.
I'll be like, you know what? I just made all that up. Those are plants.
Those aren't even real words. That's awesome. Okay, so we talked about search some, and that's super powerful, and I know that's covered pretty extensively in Evernote Essentials. What are some other kind of maybe more advanced type uses for Evernote? I mean, I know there's some Chrome extension stuff that I use a bunch, with Web Clipper and some of that.
So this is something I was actually going to do for the Evernote Essentials people, and then I'll give you a kind of a preview of it now. So I use an app. Are you an iPhone guy?
Yes.
Okay. So that seems to be common. I realize not everyone is, and to everyone who's not, I'm not generalizing here. I apologize. This isn't going to be relevant to you, really. But there's an app on iOS called Workflow. Have you heard of this app?
I feel like I've heard somebody mention it, but I've never seen it or used it.
Okay. So are you familiar with Automator on your Mac?
Yes.
Okay. So for those who don't know, Automator is basically a way to chain simple actions together. So I can say, take all the images in this folder and do this thing to them, like change the file name to match this pattern, rotate them all 90 degrees and make them all this size. And then, it's sort of a way to automate basic tasks. And Workflow is an iOS app that's similar. It's not the same. So I have a Workflow recipe where I launch this little deal on my phone. I hit a button and it gives me a list. So is this a meal, an office expense, or an auto expense, or other, right? So there's 4 basic categories for deductible expenses that I keep track of. And when I run it, it's going to show me that list, and I pick one. And then it opens the camera. And I go, okay, so aim it at the receipt I'm holding. I hit boom, and I've already chosen meal, let's say, meal, and I take a picture of the meal receipt, and then it formats that, formats a note in Evernote with the image that I just took, the receipt for the food, and it makes a note. The title says meal and the date, and then it goes into my taxes notebook for that year. So that's one kind of quick and dirty way that I use Workflow to save stuff to Evernote.
That's awesome.
Yeah, it's pretty great, and it's really not that hard to do at all. Their integration with Evernote is really, really good and pretty simple to put together. So yeah, unless you're talking about like programming for Evernote, like making applications that talk to it, most of the advanced stuff, it comes down to automation, in my opinion, and sort of removing friction from how you get stuff into Evernote, how you get stuff out of it, how stuff's organized. So that Workflow example is a pretty simple one. And I'll, if Jody will allow it, I'll post a link to that Workflow recipe in the show notes.
That'd be awesome.
So people can see kind of how it works. And I'll maybe, so it's, that kind of stuff is, in my opinion, where folks go once they get a real solid hang of how the thing works on its own, is like third-party applications and automations.
Yeah, I think I remember when I read the kind of the email hacking with the Amazon stuff in Evernote Essentials, I thought, oh man, this is genius, because I get so many emails, and trying to keep track of all of that. Again, it just kind of put it all in one spot for me, went ahead and set that up, goes right in the notebook it's supposed to be in. I don't have to think about it. I don't have to worry about it.
Yeah.
One less. I use it a lot, like you said, for receipts from things, because I too am usually purchasing a lot of things from Amazon or from like t-shirt companies. We're always doing t-shirts for everything.
Sure.
And that kind of stuff. And yeah, anything like that just goes right to Evernote. Between that and I think I use that a lot. I use Web Clipper a ton. A ton. I use Web Clipper a lot.
So let's describe what Web Clipper is for those who don't know.
Oh yeah, that would be good. Sorry.
Okay. Jody.
Gosh.
So the Web Clipper is an extension that you can install in just about any browser, Windows or Mac. They behave a little differently depending on the browser you're using, but the basic idea is if I'm looking at a web page and I want to save all or some of that web page to my Evernote account, you just highlight the part you want, or don't. If you want to save the whole thing, don't highlight anything, and then click the little elephant icon. and it will show you a little bar. It says, okay, well, this is the thing I'm about to capture. Here's the title. Here's the notebook you might want to put it in. If you want to tag it, you can do that here, and then you hit save. And it will just grab whatever content either you selected or didn't, and just stick it into your Evernote account. And that's really, really helpful for research, anything. Like it's a very, very cool feature of Evernote. And they'll advertise it pretty heavily when you install the app, suggesting that you do it. Install the web clippers, which you should.
Yes, you should.
They're really great. And they also work on Android and iOS. So if you're looking at, I'm not an Android user, but I have used it. I'm familiar with the fact that it does work. I couldn't tell you the process from memory. But if you're looking at a web page in iOS, you tap the little share box, and then the Evernote icon will appear in the list of apps that you can share with, and it will just pop it up and go, okay, here's the title of the page, here's the notebook, hit save, and it will clip that whole page to your Evernote account from your phone or your tablet or whatever. So really, really useful, especially if you have to do a lot of, like I imagine Jody doing things like retreats. Maybe he's evaluating 10 different retreat centers for this coming, summer thing with his kids. Then, kind of capture all those, and then now you have a place for all of the research for that project is beginning to assemble,
Yeah, it's awesome. And I love that it gives you options too. So you can take the whole page, you can do a part of the page, you can do a simplified article. So maybe I just need the text here. I don't need all this other stuff. And man, it's good. It's great. Do you also, I think this is in Evernote. I think this is where I learned it, like kind of have a default notebook.
I realized that when we were talking that I didn't bring that up as one of the ways to get started. And I'm glad you mentioned that. So if you don't tell Evernote where to put something, it will put it in your default notebook, which you can configure in the settings. I have a notebook called the @ symbol inbox, that for two reasons. First of all, it sorts at the top of any alphabetized list of stuff. And it's just a clever name for things like when stuff is added to my account that I haven't personally kind of filed or have prepared to file somewhere more permanent, it ends up in that notebook. So that notebook is sort of like an inbox, like a staging area, where if I have 10 emails that I've forwarded from, different people or places or whatever, and I want to put them in my Evernote account, but they're not going to live in the inbox folder necessarily, I can go, okay, well, now that I've got this email from Jody, this should probably go in the podcasting, notebook, for example. So I can change the title if the title's like an email subject that's got forward and and a bunch of other kind of noise in there. I can clean that up, add any tags I want to, remove any extraneous data in the note that I don't really need, and then drop it into the podcasting notebook. So if you have a place where all that stuff kind of gets collected, and you can bypass it if if you're looking around on the web at gardening articles and you're going to put everything in the gardening notebook, you don't need to put it in the inbox notebook first, of course. You can put it directly into whatever notebook you want. But having a place where everything gets funneled through by default is a pretty good idea. And it helps keep the rest of your account organized. So the only thing that's kind of a mess is the inbox. Everything else is,
Yeah, I think there were three big notebooks I added. One was the inbox, one was a filing cabinet notebook, and the other was kind of an archive. And so those three kind of live almost independently from the others in the sense that, the filing cabinet for me, it's a stack too. So I've got other notebooks in that. Mm-hmm. But that's keeping a lot of those documents that I need later, whether it's car maintenance or house stuff or whatever. And then the archive, if I've just got stuff that's hanging around, I'm like, I'm not really ever going to need this anymore, I'll kick it to that.
Yeah. Well, I think having a place where you just sort of store things.
Yeah.
And, like I said earlier, sometimes they're not of any use to you, but doesn't mean if it doesn't cost you anything to have them, then why not? And that might there's some people who are probably kind of blanching at that idea of just keeping stuff for no reason at all. And if you can totally delete things if you want to. Like I just choose personally to hang on to old stuff, mostly because I kind of like having that personal history thing that I mentioned before. So data that in isolation isn't going to be all that useful to me. When I look back and see it in context, I don't know. It might create a richer, because if I imagine this is the receipt for the car seat I bought when my daughter was born, and here's the oil change receipt for the car I was driving at the time. Like I can really picture myself driving in that car with that car seat with my daughter sitting in it. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So it just kind of creates a richer history.
Well, and there's no point of really at this. I mean, I think a lot of times we think about decluttering and tossing things out just because we don't want to be like a hoarder. But in this sense, it doesn't really matter if it's there or not. It doesn't affect you one way or the other, really. It's just there.
If you have a hang up about it though, as a person, which, no judgment here. If
I don't think most
you.
youth pastors care about clutter.
All right, fair enough.
Most that I know are not super organized. That's why you're here.
Cool.
This is our mission today, is to organize all youth pastors.
Wow. All right.
There you go. It's a small task.
Yeah, no big deal.
No, but I love that too, because you're right. A lot of times it'll even have, if I've got my location settings on, particularly, which I do, it'll tag, it'll even tag the address sometimes of where I am when I take the picture.
Yep.
Which is awesome. I mean, that's great. And so, I've been on several trips, with students overseas, and we end up in another place, and, I can throw pictures in there while we're on that trip and come back and have those forever to always look back to. But if we come back and say we're going to share that with the rest of the church or report that, I can easily access those and put those up.
Yeah.
Can you talk briefly about the power of sharing notes?
Sure.
Because I think that's really helpful also.
Yeah. So you can share notes and notebooks in a couple of different ways. Sharing notes is, like I said, a note is just one piece of data. It can have a lot of stuff in it, but it's just one. It's like, imagine one Word document. That's like effectively what a note is. And if I make a note about something, I want to share it with my girlfriend or my mom or whatever, I can just hit the share button and either create a public link that anybody can, if anybody knows it, they can open it, but the URL is sufficiently convoluted that no one's going to guess it. You know what I mean? It's got
Right.
like 48 characters of gibberish at the end that people are just not going to guess. So you create the public link, you send it to whoever you want, and they can open it and look at it on their, their phone or their computer or whatever they happen to be using. But if I want to collaborate with somebody, so like my accountant, who is a good friend of mine, that the taxes notebook that I mentioned earlier, like that's automatically shared with him. So he has access to all of my tax records. He can put stuff in there. And when when I have my taxes done, I go, hey, can you give me the P&L from last year? Sure thing. He, exports it from his fancy pants, accountant software and dumps it into the Evernote notebook. And then it syncs down to my account and I now have it. So that's useful for a variety of different use cases. When you're working with anybody, not on anything, because it's not going to be universally applicable, but if you're finding yourself in a situation where you need to, in sort of not real time, have access to the same resource as somebody else and be able to kind of update things and move things around within this, this bucket that you're sharing, Evernote's a great tool for that. Just to be clear, though, you cannot do what a lot of people wish you could do, which is like real time, like Google Docs style composition and editing on a single document. So if you and I are looking at, hypothetically looking at show notes for this episode, and you're not going to see like, a purple line across the middle on the line where my cursor is sitting with my name next to it, and watch me move around, watch me add words and stuff. You can't do that in Evernote. The sync is not that fast.
Right.
But if you and I had, let's say you and I are planning to the Organize the World's Youth Pastors project, and we've, clipped a few articles from the web, and we've written some notes about ideas about how we might be able to kind of further this mission, and we both have access to that notebook, and we can both see what each other has written. That's one use case. Another is for sharing notebooks publicly, where only I can write to that notebook. So it's read only to the rest of the world, except for me. So if I make, let's say I wanted to make an FAQ for something, who knows? Yeah. And I would just make a new notebook in Evernote, add my 5 or 6 notes to it, and then publish it. And then I could link people directly to it. They could open it in their web browser or on their phone and read everything in those notes. And they could even do what's called joining that notebook, meaning they can add it to their account. It's still read-only, but they'll automatically receive any changes that I make. So that's another kind of cool way. If you're maybe in like the church org chart, you've got, the kind of head guy or gal who's making all the policies and disseminating information to the staff, and kind of go, okay, well, this is the policies and procedures manual for, my favorite church. And people can, subscribe to that notebook, add it to their accounts, and read everything that the person writes, but they can't change it.
Yeah, so that's great. And so sometimes I'll use that for, I feel like everything's coming back to events and retreats, and that's not my intent. But, if we've got an event coming up, well, parents always have a lot of questions. And so I can put together, like you're saying, a simple FAQ for it. And then what happens is I get more questions that weren't on there. I can add those as I go.
Yep.
And so they get them, continually as I'm updating that. And I'm not having to go and resend out another, sheet or another whatever. And that's been really, really helpful.
Nice.
as well. Okay, let's talk about, you want to explain for everybody kind of more, obviously Evernote Essentials tells you how to use Evernote. We've talked about that. But more specifically, what's in there, a little bit about that, what they'll find for it. Because you've just released the latest version of this, and it's a pretty major update.
Yeah. It's been about 2.5 years in the making. And it's by far the biggest, most exhaustive thing I've made about Evernote. But what you'll find is basically kind of a tour of like the building blocks. So I talk about things like what's a note, what's a notebook. Jody mentioned stacks earlier. A stack is basically a collection of notebooks. What are tags? How does the search work? Kind of the nuts and bolts of like what the app can do, and how to, in my opinion, how best to use it. Then we go over some more strategic things like how to organize your account, what kind of things you can put in there. Some more kind of one-off organizational tips that don't really fit in any particular larger theme. There's a lot of use cases like sort of traveling, which I don't travel a ton, but I did once upon a time. For being parents, that's where the whole capture the artwork thing came from. So different things like that. And Evernote Essentials has 3 tiers. So the cheap one will get you the basic version will get you the book and some use cases. The middle tier will get you additional use cases and other bonusy stuff. And the most expensive one will get you a bunch of videos and interviews with other Evernote users, that kind of thing. But it's basically meant to, by explanation and by example, show you how Evernote works and how it can work. So it's fine and dandy for me to go, okay, well, this is a note, and you can drag files and pictures and text into this note, and isn't that cool? And you're kind of like, well, I feel a little less dumb, but I don't really know how the use case for this is still not obvious to me. And the idea is to kind of show you this is how a bunch of different people from a bunch of different walks of life use Evernote effectively. And obviously most of it is from my experience, and I'm only one guy. So it's not meant to be like a dictator style instruction. It's to mostly show you what the thing's capable of doing and how to take advantage of what it's capable of doing.
Yeah, and it's fantastic. And it's a resource. There's a reason I recommend it on the resource page of the blog. There's a reason I recommend it to just about everybody. I recommend Evernote to, especially if you're a visual learner. Man, it's so helpful because even in the older versions, the screenshots were just really helpful trying to figure out, okay, what am I looking at and looking for? Because Evernote is so powerful and there are so many options, just being able to navigate that super, super helpful. So
it's also a lot of really bad jokes. So
they weren't bad. They weren't bad jokes. Gardening jokes. I don't know. There's a lot of cooking jokes. Okay.
So they're pretty. I get more than a little like not negative feedback necessarily. People are like, you could really cool it with the jokes.
Yeah.
And I'm like, well, I'm not gonna because it's mine.
Yeah.
And I think it's hilarious.
I'm not a comedian. I'm writing a resource.
Right. And productivity software manuals are not known for being especially colorful or entertaining. Right. So I was like, I'm about to change that. So,
well, as youth pastors, we always respect things that are funny.
I'm glad.
We work with middle school kids, so
right.
Everything is somewhat of an adventure and funny.
Yeah, I can imagine.
Well, I will put a link for Evernote Essentials in the show notes. You can find that. My affiliate link for that is thelongerhaul.com/Evernote Essentials. So I highly encourage you to go check it out. For sure, you can download Evernote for free. The basic plan is free, and it's actually really powerful, the free version.
Yeah.
And then if you find that you're using it a lot, then you can upgrade to more of their premium services, which allows a few more features and things like that. But I would imagine for most listening, just the free version would be more than sufficient.
I think the only thing I would say yes for sure. The only thing that I would recommend people do if they're going to stick with the free version of Evernote is when they're clipping articles from the web, use the simplified article view because that strips out all of the extraneous navigation, sidebar elements, advertising, that kind of thing. Most images, because the way they price Evernote mostly is by how much data you can upload to Evernote every month. So the basic plan gets you 60 megabytes of data, which if you're talking about text is a ton. If you're talking about photos is almost nothing. Like you'll blow through that in an afternoon if you're not careful.
Right.
So the more you can do to kind of not include a bunch of images you don't care about in your Evernote account, that will go a long way in keeping you below the 60 megabyte per month threshold. Now, the next tier up, the plus tier, I believe gets you a gigabyte, which is...
It's a big jump.
Yeah, and then it's 10 gigabytes per month for the premium account, which is what I have, obviously. And I've never in my entire life come close to even the 1 gigabyte limit back when it was 1 gigabyte. Yeah. So, yeah, the 60 megabyte limit is obviously there to let you kick the tires. But don't be surprised, even if you're careful, to kind of find yourself bumping up against that monthly limit.
Yeah. So, I mean, if you've got any type of professional expense or anything like that,
right,
man, that's for sure something that would be worth pursuing if you find yourself using it a lot, which the more I use it, the more I use it. I mean, it's like, it just snowball for sure. But man, so check out Evernote Essentials. Absolutely. Go ahead and give Evernote a try. It really is helpful. One question that we kind of talked about earlier, and this, I don't remember if this may have been before we start recording, but what if Evernote goes away and all my life is in it?
Well, a couple things. So if you're using Evernote on a desktop computer, like a Mac or a PC, all of you, there's an asterisk that I can't write because I'm not writing it, but there's all of your data is on your computer. So when the way it syncs is like it syncs an entire copy of everything down to your local computer and up to Evernote's web service. So if the Evernote data center were to implode right this second, like all the data it's still in the app. I can still export it. I can still manipulate it. Still do whatever I need to. Now, it would not be fun to move from Evernote to something else because the way Evernote stores data is fairly specific to Evernote. But you can always export every single thing that's in your account, and you might need a programmery nerd to kind of translate it into whatever else you want to use. But it's not, all is not lost. Now, if you decide you want to leave Evernote, that's part of the reason why I caution against going just whole hog into Evernote the second you get it, because getting stuff out of Evernote, while possible, is not super simple. And the data that you get is not really, in some ways, it's conducive to moving to other applications. I know Apple's Notes app and Microsoft OneNote both have import tools that can talk to Evernote export files. So if you want to move from Evernote to one of those things, that's now possible. But aside from those pretty recent developments, there's, you're going to have to kind of by hand massage the data you pull out of Evernote to put it into something else, which can be kind of a pain in the butt. So don't put everything into Evernote and then throw away the original, because if you decide to leave Evernote, you're looking at like a week's worth of work and probably a little bit of crying.
Yeah.
So,
but the good news is it's not going away anytime soon.
Right. Well, as far as we know, I have no insider knowledge about this, but
you're still employed and.
Well, I don't work there anymore.
Did I know that? I feel like I knew that.
Okay. Yeah. I stopped working there almost 2 years ago.
I feel like I knew that was the second meeting with the big guy.
Yeah. Well, hey, Phil, I don't want to work for Evernote anymore.
That's right. We got to have a meeting and it's not good news.
Right.
Well, Brett, thanks, man, for coming on and sharing with folks. I'm sure it was helpful. And,
my pleasure.
I hope folks give it a good look. Absolutely. And really try to put it to work. I think it can be extremely beneficial for most folks in their ministries. Absolutely. So be sure to head over longerhaul.com/Evernote Essentials. That's the affiliate link there for Evernote Essentials. And if folks want to connect with you or find you outside of this podcast, where's the best place to do that?
Let's see. So my website is brettkelly.org, and you can find me on Twitter, which is where I'm, as far as social media stuff, most active, and I'm Mr. Brett Kelly, only because Brett Kelly was taken. So, yeah, but my website's kind of the hub for everything I do. So if you want to go there, there's links to Twitter and all the other stuff.
Awesome. And I'll put links for both of those in the show notes.
Cool.
Man, thank you so much. I appreciate you giving of your time this morning for you. And
my pleasure, man. Thanks for having me.
Cool. All right, we'll catch you later, man.
Sounds good.
All right, bye. Well, there you go, Mr. Brett Kelly with Evernote Essentials. I really hope that you are taking notes there, or at least listening if you're in the car driving. And hopefully if you're driving, you're not taking notes. But the beauty is you can always go back and listen again. A lot of really, really, really good stuff in there. Again, Evernote, I'm telling you, is such an invaluable resource for you as a youth pastor and youth worker. It really is one of those things that I'm not sure how I would do without at this point. I just use it so often and for so many things. So I hope you'll give it a really good look. At least, start like we said there, start with the free version. I think for most people that will be fine. If you start using it a ton, you may see the need to upgrade, but for the most part, at least starting out, the free version, we find there's really nothing there to risk. And I really would highly encourage you to take a good look at Evernote Essentials. Brett has really done a knockout job putting this together. Evernote, as amazing of a resource and a program as it is, and as powerful of a program as it is, it's a bit overwhelming when you start, probably for some. And so it's pretty intuitive. You can figure this out. But Evernote Essentials just gives you such a huge head start and kickstart to really not only kind of figure it out quicker, but really get the most out of using it and the most benefit out of that. And there's just not a better resource out there for learning and using Evernote than Evernote Essentials. So really head over, check that out, and it's worth every penny, I promise, for that. My affiliate link for it is thelongerhaul.com/Evernote Essentials. thelongerhaul.com/Evernote Essentials. It doesn't cost you any more to go through that affiliate link. If you want to do that, that's great. I do earn a small bit of commission on that, but that is not why Brett's on the show, and that is not why I'm recommending this to you. You will not hurt my feelings if you don't use that and you just go around it, but that's there for you if you'd like to. Really, really helpful stuff. We'll put the links that were mentioned here again in the show notes, as well as the workflow recipe that Brett mentioned and gave. We'll have that there in the show notes for you too, over at thelongerhaul.com/episode 039. That's thelongerhaul.com/episode 039. And then finally, just again, if you're enjoying the podcast, if you have a few minutes, make sure you subscribe so you catch it as it comes out, each episode as they come out, mostly weekly, except when things are a bit crazy like they have been. But be sure to subscribe so you get those. Head over to thelongerhaul.com, jump on the mailing list, and join several thousand youth pastors and youth workers there on the mailing list. They get some weekly emails from me, tips and tricks and helps and all kinds of stuff. Be the first to know about all the new stuff that comes out as it comes down the pipeline there for sure. And man, I think that'll about do it for us today. Great episode. Thanks for hanging in there and giving it a listen. And so we will call it for today. And until next time, give them Jesus.
Thanks for listening to the Longer Haul Youth Ministry Podcast at www.thelongerhaul.com.